Just a note before we start. Our show talks about touchy subjects that may be difficult for some of our listeners. Take care of yourself. If you feel you need to seek help, see the links at the end of our show notes for resources.
Hey y'all, and welcome to Touchy Subjects Podcast, the podcast that aims to break the silence that tends to come with conversations around domestic and sexual violence. I'm Sean.
And I'm Amanda.
And today we are going to be discussing Dana's story with our special guest, Dana Diaz. So thank you for joining us today, Dana.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Yes, we are very excited to have you, despite knowing that we're not going to be talking about horror movies the entire time, because I know you and I could go forever on that.
Yes, we can.
But before we jump into your story and everything, would you like to introduce yourself to our audience?
Sure. I never know what to say. I'm just a regular person like everybody else. I just happened to go through a lifetime of stuff that brought me to where I am today, which is essentially, somebody who has survived childhood abuse, narcissistic abuse in my first marriage. And after it made me physically ill, I realized that I had a responsibility to kind of share my experience because I do have an education in journalism and psychology. I wanted to be able to verbalize that for people and help them to understand what they've been through, because I'm one of those people that can tell other people what they're experiencing, how to heal from it, how to recover. I'm a little less efficient with myself, but fortunately I have people in my life that it's kind of like when your therapist goes to therapy. I'm that girl. You can come to me. I got you. I'm going to help you through this. But I'm also going to go to somebody and make sure that I keep getting better and I keep learning and growing. So that's where we're at.
That's the sign of a good service worker person, I think, is that they are able to recognize, like, hey, I'm not great at these things in my own life, so I have to see someone too.
Exactly. What really struck me is just one day, like, I've come very far along, but I'm on an airplane and the flight attendants doing their thing, and they have that thing that they say when if the masks drop down, the oxygen masks, don't put it on or you're supposed to put it on yourself first and then on your favorite child or whoever you like on the plane.
Child.
Yeah, whatever it is. Because I mean, they say your children, but I'm like, realistically, you got to pick like your one favorite person on the plane to save other than yourself. But your instinct, especially, I don't know if it's a woman thing or a mother thing, your instinct is, no, I got to put everybody else's on them first and then myself. And that's how I've lived my life, is let me take care of everybody else. And I kind of came to that point like, oh, this airplane thing actually makes sense of life and in what I do. Like, I got to take care of me so that I am in the best position to take care of everyone else that I'm trying to take care of.
Right. You might be able to get it on your favorite kid if you don't put it on yourself first, but the other kids, it's just not going to happen. Like,
you know what? The sad thing is I have one child, my son, and forgive me, I bust his poor little balls. I tell him, I've told him his whole life, I'm like, every man for himself. And after what we've been through, that's probably not as funny and probably not good parenting, but the good news is he's very independent and self-sufficient. I kind of look at it like cats. They feed themselves, they take care of themselves. I wanted my son to be like a cat, but he's wonderful. He is very good and very, very strong-willed and independent. I don't know where he gets it from.
Yeah, can't imagine. Can't imagine where.
The mystery may never be solved.
Never.
Also, you say you're just a person. You're a multi-book author, which is not just a normal person thing. So,
well, maybe so. But I guess because we can get into we can unravel a lot with me. I swear I just want psychologists to put me in a room and analyze me because I can offer a lot. But I think it's that childhood that I had, which is what my second book that's coming out is about, being not so much the physical abuse, but the verbal abuse that, I was never enough. I'm never gonna be, never will be, not this, not that. It just, I was like that ultimate people pleasing child, always striving to be better, always striving for whatever it was that would gain that notice or that attention or my parents' pride, but it was never given to me. So I think, I don't know, I nicely call it humility as an adult, but it's one of those things that I'm just now learning at 48 years old to be able to say, good job, girl, you did something good, you accomplished something. But it's really hard for me to be proud of myself, but I'm getting there. It's one of those things we're still working on. But thank you for that. I appreciate that you acknowledge that, because it takes a lot of work to publish a book, let me tell you. The writing part isn't such a problem for me because I talk too much anyway, and I type 90 words a minute. So like every thought that runs through my mind, I have no problem getting into the computer. But the publishing, trying to get it together and in a way that people will understand and receive it well, it's a whole other thing.
Well, we are glad you are here, and we are
Well,
glad
thank you.
that you are learning to be able to be proud of yourself, because one book isn't anything to scoff at. 3 is very impressive.
Well, thank you. But it's really not about the publishing of the books. I had said that from day one with the people around me. It's not about the books, it's about getting the message out. And that's why I do podcasting too, because some people, I mean, let's be realistic. I have people reach out to me that are in abusive marriages and they've got 4 little kids. They don't have time to sit around reading my book. They don't have the ability to have a book that has abuse in the title sitting on their nightstand or their coffee table. So sometimes something like this format, somebody that's listening might hear it and say, I know somebody, my coworker, my friend, my sister, I can share the link of this podcast with that person and she's going to get the message. Even if she only listens to 10 minutes of it, something might click. If she listens to the whole thing, maybe she'll reach out for help. So that's really the mission. And I think essentially what you guys are trying to do as well. So I'm glad that we could get this together and hopefully reach somebody.
Yes. So, you had started kind of talking about your childhood a little bit, because that's really what your books are about, are the experiences that you've had. So, knowing that you're here today to kind of share your story a little bit, we want to make sure we give you as much time as possible. So, just the floor is yours.
Oh goodness. I don't ever know where to begin. So what I'm going to do is begin with the first book, which is the book that's out, Gasping for Air: The Stranglehold of Narcissistic Abuse. I was 19 years old when I met my first husband. He immediately reminded me of my abusive stepfather. I wanted no part of it, but I had not been loved. And that's the part we have to answer with the second book, is what happened in her childhood. Well, my mother didn't want me. Even when she got pregnant with me, she had not wanted me. But at that time, she was not allowed to adopt me out. Her mother wouldn't let her, and other situations weren't available as they are today. So here I am. Unfortunately, everything in my childhood was, there was a lot of distance emotionally and physically between my mother and I. I mean, I felt it. So here I am as an adult. I have no idea what codependence is and people pleasing and all this stuff we talk about now. But even though this young man repulsed me, I went against everything in me, because we use this word desperate, and I'm just going to say it. I was desperate. Like, I did not love myself because I was taught from as young as I can remember that I was nothing. Nobody was ever going to love me. Those words were spoken to me. Nobody's ever going to love you. You're not skinny enough. You're not smart enough. You're never enough. Nothing was enough. So I had to try to be more. I had to try to be something. And part of that was just like getting somebody to notice me. Kind of like I always say, like, like when your dog shakes and stares at you when you're eating, because it's like, oh, I'm going to die if you don't feed me. It's kind of like one of those things, even though this is a well-fed fat dog that's, perfectly fine. We've all had that shaky dog. that's kind of what I was. Here's this young man that I'm seeing, like, he doesn't like me, and I'm like, no, but look at me, look at me. I'll do anything you want if you notice me. That's people pleasing. That's codependence right there, seeking that outward external validation. The problem is that gets us in trouble, because 3 weeks into when he finally did notice me, because he was very aloof and arrogant and wanted entitled, he felt entitled. He had no right to be, honestly, but he was. And I jumped through every hoop. Whatever he needed or wanted, just notice me. So then he finally asks me out. And here we are in this, a couple weeks into dating, and things are flying across the room at my face. And doors are coming off hinges. Walls are getting punched. And I'm going to say now, some of the things I may say are triggering, and I apologize. So please heed that warning going forward here. And the problem is, I knew it was wrong. I sensed it was wrong, but I stayed because I had a childhood that said, no matter what happens, you tolerate it. No matter what happens, you just excuse it. Maybe he had a bad day. Maybe I shouldn't have said that. Maybe I shouldn't have done that. Maybe I should rethink everything about who I am so that this man will be pleased with me and not act so angrily and not take his anger out on me. And then I have my mother, who I'm trying to confide in, even though we don't have much of a relationship, who's saying, well, when you make a commitment to somebody, you have to honor it, because that's what she did in her marriage, after her abusive childhood and after, her husband, honestly, I never saw him lay a hand on her, but after how he dealt with me, I wouldn't be surprised. So it was really hard. And I think it also speaks to the times, because we have to understand, like, even in our lifetimes in the 70s, a woman in the United States could not file charges against her husband. I mean, couldn't even get a credit card, a bank account without her husband's signature. And I won't get into a whole feminist thing here, but it's a very limiting thing. We look at our grandmas and our, aunts, uncles, that, things were happening. Maybe now we're hearing about it in our adult life. Oh, I had no idea Uncle so-and-so, was unfaithful. I had no idea this family member did that, but nobody talked about it. Polite society doesn't talk about it. And even now, what are we doing to victims? When I tried to talk about it, shh, we don't say those things. We don't talk about those things. So I was doing the same thing. I was trying to be a good girl. I was trying to be a good wife. I'm not going to talk about it. I'm just going to appease him and fly under the radar, make sure I don't anger him, make sure. But the problem is, over the span of 25 years, I'm breathing deeply because it's exhausting to think about it. Point A was things flying across the room at my face. Then every time something else happened, it was just a little more, a little more. It was like my boundaries were very loose. I'm not even sure I had any, but whatever boundaries he perceived, he just kind of stepped right over them so that it was uncomfortable. I didn't like it. I knew it was wrong. I knew it shouldn't be happening, but it wasn't a deal breaker. Now, I'm going to say this because every one of us has been in those, oh, if he cheated on me, I would leave. If he ever, but then you're in the relationship and you're sharing rent or a mortgage, and then you get married, and then you have kids, and your families are intertwined, and there's other factors in life that contribute to why we stay in a relationship with that, which have nothing to do, unfortunately, with the person or the relationship. So that thing that made you a little uneasy and that you wished you would have called attention to, but you didn't because you didn't want to upset them, you let it go. You suppress your feelings and you move on. But then the next time something happens, it's a little bit worse. It's a little worse. It's kind of like I always say, like gaining weight. 10 years later, you're like, how did I gain 10 pounds? Because it crept on every little eighth of an ounce every day, just kind of added up. And that's what's happening in these, especially with narcissists in these relationships. It's just a little bit worse every time till by the end of our 25 years together, after the divorce, after I've got knives, guns being shot outside my house, police at my house. Like, how did this happen? How did this happen? And society and people, even our neighbors, our families, people, oh, but he's such a nice guy.
Mm.
We had no idea because we're wearing a mask, we're hiding it. I had a friend that told me this once. She said that we're wearing the mask as much as the person that's abusing us because we're not telling anybody, or if we are, we're being very careful, but we usually don't. We just go out. Like, I'm at the t-ball games for my son, carrying the cupcakes with a smile, like everything's fine. And we go to the family and he's got his arm around me, like we're just a regular couple that's just happy. And but the second we get in the car, or God forbid, I remember being at a wedding once for a cousin, and he snatched me by my arm behind, half a wall, and ripped into me about something I said to somebody. And, it's these little moments that people don't see. But then we wipe the tears, or keep our heads down. So we don't want anyone to see it because we're being told that we have to carry the shame of it. It's like it puts it on us. And it's hard when you are in this victim situation, when everything around you and everything in our society and the person abusing you is saying you should be ashamed for this happening. It is your fault, and not just your fault that it's happening, but it's your fault for feeling the way you do. It's your fault for exposing it. God forbid if you speak about it or show any sign of angst. And it's a terrible thing. And I realized very late well, I'm not too late in life, thankfully, but I've met people that are in their 80s that are still carrying this shame of what they experienced when they should be the ones standing up and saying, no, I didn't do anything to deserve this, but we're made to feel like we do. And then we're shamed for feeling like, we should have a voice, or that we should have justice, or that, we should have resources available. And there's so much that's wrong that needs to be corrected. So I'm glad that, between social media and podcasting and everything else that's out there now, that hopefully we can make things a little different and find that justice, at least for the young women and the young men that are in these situations now.
It is nice seeing that it is kind of more accessible, at least for people to be able to talk about these things now than obviously like when you were younger and when your mother was younger. Like those were very much quiet, do not talk about it. And even today, where like you still run into it, but at least it is that slight bit more acceptable now. So hopefully, as we keep going, it becomes more and more open for people to be able to talk about what they have going on.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the biggest thing because, I found out, after my divorce, we were together 25 years, and there were people that were like, oh, we had no idea, but he's such a nice guy. And, almost villainizing me, though, that I shouldn't have ever said anything and I shouldn't be outing him. And it's a real thing, this victim shaming. And I thought, yeah, but isn't it wrong what he did to me? Like, why am I being made to feel bad? And I have been exiled for it. I have had two sides of the family completely just cut me off because I exposed the truth. And half of another side of a family because of the second book coming out. It's just so wrong to make somebody feel bad for speaking their truth, because why is it okay for us to be hush hush about it even if we know it's going on? I just have so much issue with this. And so I am that person that, I am standing up for everybody because I understand I was silent for 45 years, but I'm that person that I'm not going to be silent anymore. I'm going to speak about it. And you know what? My halo is a little crooked myself, because that's one thing that when I went to publish my book, Gasping for air. The publisher read it the first time and she said, okay, the villainous husband, the poor victim wife, she wasn't being, rude, but she's like, boo-hoo, it's been done and overdone. Something about this, you participated in. And I had to really think about it. And what I ended up publishing was the ultimate truth. But, I realized over time that I was participating in the same lie that he was putting out. By enabling it, excusing it, tolerating it, I was participating in the lie. I was not asking for the abuse, but I wasn't, in a way, like I said, participating. I didn't put an end to it because I thought, for whatever reasons in my head, that I deserved it, had to take it, had to endure it to keep the peace. I wish I would have had somebody that would have said, no, this is not right. You don't deserve this. So I need to be that person now for all the people who are in those situations. I can't tell them to leave. I will never be that person to tell them to leave, because I think it's very important for people to understand that depending on your unique situation, you might be better off staying. Because I'm going to tell you what, I don't care, narcissist, not a narcissist, if somebody is abusing you, if there's domestic violence, it's not going to get better when you leave. It's not going to get better when you divorce. I wish that divorce or breaking up or whatever it is ended the relationship. It does not. It ends your financial obligations to each other. It divides financial assets and your civil relationship. It does not end that relationship. And that is only when they amp up and get worse. And you have to be prepared for that.
Yeah. Well, it's one of the things that we know when working with victims of domestic violence. It's the up to, I believe it's 2 years, not even just one, up to 2 years after someone leaves an abusive relationship is the most dangerous time for that person now. Because that's when this person no longer has the control they once had, and they might go to extreme lengths to try and regain that power and control over that victim.
And that's exactly what it is. I even would argue, and I'm sure you agree, when that person senses that you're aware, that you've woken up and you see them for who they are, and you start pulling away unconsciously in the relationship, when they know, and you don't want to do this anymore, that's when it starts, really. But if you do make that jump, because for me, and I talk about this in Gasping for Air, it's, and this is a common thing that I'm sure too. They say it takes 7 attempts to leave before you finally do. In February of 2020, I talked to the 6th attorney number 6, but this time I was going to file for divorce. This time I was ready, not like the other times. This time I was ready. The first time was 2005. This was 2020. This shows you how long I wanted out. And I had some homework to do because, I think everybody's situation was unique, but it's not like we lived in the suburbs and just had a house and a kid and a dog. We lived in the country. We had a farm. There were farm animals, which are considered assets. And, when you have cows, pigs, and chickens that actually need to be relocated, rehomed, and you need the person who they're registered to cooperate with this, but you don't want them to know you're leaving them. So I had a little work to do before I could actually file and try to make it as peaceable and uneventful as possible, which in my head, I still had this fantasy that if I went about it just right and eased the process for it could make it easy for all of us, and he would understand and it would be okay. But anyway, a week after I talked to this lawyer's attorney number 6, we went into the shelter in place for COVID. This is essentially where my book was born, because now I'm in a house with a man who has sent me numerous, he did not talk to me much. He gave me silent treatment. I got silent treatment in childhood too. It's a typical control tactic. Really mucks you up and makes you so uneasy that you usually run and chase after them and grovel for their attention and beg for their affection and everything. But at this point, I was done with it. So he would text me, email me, he would try to keep me awake in the middle of the night. My phone would ding. It was just awful. I moved down to my basement because I honestly did not feel safe, obviously, with him for a multitude of reasons. But because we could not go anywhere, we couldn't even go to work. I was so sure he had made threats on my life. I was so sure he was going to push me down the stairs or something. Something was going to happen. He was going to, he had once, and I'm not even kidding you, actually pledged our stairway, and I fell down the stairs, and I was hurt, but I was okay. But I just had these things in my head, like he's going to do something so that I get injured or potentially lose my life, and he's going to, be the poor widow and poor me, but he will have gotten rid of me without getting his hands dirty, so to speak. So
Mhm.
I started keeping a journal. I slept in the basement. I eventually just moved everything down to the basement and just lived there, kind of created an apartment. And my son, my poor teenage son, didn't know what to make of it, but it's not like he didn't know that there was something going on. He just didn't know the details and the severity of it. But I started keeping a notebook, just a plain old notebook that I actually got out of my son's closet. I was one of those moms that at the end of the school year, every year since like second grade, I would tear out the used pages of the notebook because I was too cheap to go out and buy 10 new notebooks in the fall. So I would just be like, here, these are fine. There's still paper in there. Well, it was unsuspecting. So I took one of those from like his fourth grade, and here's a 17-year-old kid, but it had all kinds of doodles and drawings. So if my then husband had found it, he wouldn't have suspected it was anything, crucial or meaningful. But that's where I kept my notes. It was my record of atrocities, you know, the date. He said this, he texted this, he did this, because the behavior was so erratic, because he sensed me pulling away. It's hard to miss when your wife moves all her stuff down to the basement. And he started playing these games like shutting the water off so that I wouldn't have water in the sink and the toilet, and taking bulbs out of the light fixtures so I was in the complete dark, making me more vulnerable at night. And it was childish to one extent, but these are the little things. There were other things happening where, I mean, I got to the point, I'm kind of chuckling because people would think I was nuts if they knew that before I would go to bed at night, I would shake my blankets and sheets out and check underneath because I was afraid like he was going to put a snake or a scorpion or I mean, he was doing such ridiculous things. I mean, he was putting, you know, food in drawers, to attract. We were getting a mouse problem, and it
Mhm.
was just such, again, childish things, but things that were affecting like our health, like you know in our cabinets, all these mice were getting into our food, and it's affecting our food supply, and I'm trying to feed our son, and everything's eaten through, and then they're running around the house, and that's just dirty, and it's so disturbing to me the extent they will go. But
Mhm.
within a month after that, and this is what I want to say, is guns and knives and things, but the perception to the public, to the family and the neighbors, is him going around saying, oh, she's crazy, she's unstable, so that if I were to go say anything to somebody, they would think I was nuts, because he's saying it, and he's such a nice guy. He would do anything for anybody, just not for me. So
Mhm.
it was like, I mean, to say it was psychological warfare in that house, it was getting
Yeah.
very dicey, but it was literally like Survivor. And so
Well,
my saving grace was when I came home one day and I noticed stuff was missing. And I kind of checked around, and like something's off. And even that you could feel the energy and the air was different. And I'm like, okay, what's going on? And I realized he had stripped the bed. I mean, took pictures off the wall, I went to his closet. It was mostly empty. There were a few things, and I realized he had gone, and I was like, thank you, thank you, thank you, God. Because I thought that, when you're in it, and that's such a huge thing, I didn't know that that would not be the end of it. It was only the beginning. But what he was doing too was running around telling people that I had been abusing him and that he had to leave because he couldn't endure any more harassment and that he couldn't endure any more of I was 93 pounds and 5'3". Like, how am I abusing a 180-pound man? Like, and I know we tend to think physical abuse, there's other abuses, but
Mhm.
I was the one being sexually abused, physically threatened, stalked, I think I talked about financial, the sexual abuse, the legal abuse, the using our child as a pawn between us, pitting people against me. It was just so exhausting. But the worst part of it was I felt like I could breathe. For that moment, I thought, thank you. I'm going to be okay. It's going to be okay. And 5 minutes later, I'm down in my kitchen, just kind of processing it all, getting a drink. And he busts through the door. And he has this scathing look on his face. I mean, it was ripping me to shreds without a word. Not one word was spoken. And with those thin eyes and that scowl, he just marched. I mean, pounded up the stairs. And just as fast, he came down carrying a box that he had gotten. I recognized it from his closet. He had kept it on an upper shelf of his closet. It was the box where he kept his gun. And he left the house and he tore out of the driveway. And you know why he did that? He did that to scare me, to make sure that he didn't leave that behind like he forgot. That was not unintentional. That was an intentional threat to make sure I knew that if I stepped out of line in any way, even if we weren't together, that he had that gun and that he would use it. And he eventually did try.
Well, one of the things I want to kind of point out and highlight for our audience too is when we talk about abuse and discuss like the mask that the abusers will wear, where they're going to be nice around other people because they don't want people to know they're abusive, is how important that mask is as a tactic for the abusive person. Because like you said, he's telling people that you're the crazy one, that you were the one who was abusing him. And because he has made himself out to be this really nice, caring person around other people, it makes it easier for them then to believe that lie. So not only does this then help him isolate you from your friends and from your family, this gives him the support systems of the people who were supposed to be the ones who support you.
Exactly. And, it's interesting because you can be in a relationship with somebody, and I was for 25 years and I had no idea. I had no idea until the very end when it started falling apart. It was falling apart for a long time, but it wasn't until then that I started to get that information that he had been telling his mother, who I was very close to, that, oh, I don't trust her with our son and things like that. Just putting those little snippets of doubt in people's minds. I found out he was even calling my mother and my stepfather, who he didn't even like. I mean, and they didn't like him, saying, oh, I think she's suicidal. And, oh, I think she's mentally unstable. She needs help. Yeah, I did need help. And I was mentally unstable because I was in a situation where I'm trying to survive mentally, physically. All my symptoms are manifesting because I'm suppressing all my emotions and the injustice and the disrespect. And I'm trying to put on a face for my son so he has no idea that his mom and dad are literally like, I mean, I don't even know what to call that. That's beyond dysfunction. How do you tell a 6-year-old your dad wishes I was dead? Your dad wants me out of the picture. He'd rather have my life insurance money, and then he's 17 and senses tension, but has no idea the things that are going on behind the scenes, has no idea what his dad is doing. But everybody, even at my son's school after the divorce, people were looking at me differently. And I found out, oh, because my ex was over there being Mr. Nice Guy, suddenly volunteering at the school. And, oh, yeah, it's terrible. She did this and she did that, and she's this and that. And how many people I lost, friends, family, people stopped talking to me, people cut me out. Because they believe the lies. And I think what's the hardest for me is that I thought more people that should have been for me, that I thought were on my side, apparently weren't. And so it's really hard when you're this person coming out of it, finally speaking your truth, and then you realize that, I mean, I'm talking about people who are judges and doctors and to me, very intelligent people believing outright lies about me, lies, most of which that I can prove with factual evidence, and it's taken a long time, but I got to the point where I realized I didn't have to prove anything to anybody because I knew what I went through. And at the end of the day, my job is not to convince other people to my side. Only somebody like that is concerned about whose side somebody is on. I needed to just worry about me and my kid. And that's what it came down to. And I think that even now, people will often say, well, what are the red flags I should look for? It's not about the red flags in the other person. It's about taking care of yourself. It's about the red flags in you. When I start feeling like I am saying yes, even when I want to say no, when I am not, expecting and allowing somebody to disrespect me, that's a disservice to myself. I have to turn this inward so I make sure I don't end up in those types of relationships going forward. And nobody's perfect. You're not going to get better overnight. For me to start saying no to people was a huge thing. It took me years to get, and it was so uncomfortable. And I would get all squeamish and weird, like, oh, maybe I'll call them back and tell, I want to go back and chase after, be the puppy. Like, I'll be a good girl and say yes this time. Don't be displeased with me. But it's amazing that when you realize your power and you take your power back by first asserting your boundaries. And then, I've been in situations where people use their big voice with me or think they can, kind of, I notice this, and forgive me, Sean, it's not all men, but because I'm so small and I encounter, at least in my real life, in my career outside of writing, you get these, older men that like to stand taller and puff their chest out and use their big voice, like to kind of put me back in my place, because in their generation likes to do that. That's their way of kind of strong arming you. And I will stand there very tall with my chin up and say, when you're ready to speak to me respectfully, I will gladly have this conversation with you. I couldn't do that probably even 2 years ago. Now it comes out without question. I mean, I've actually apologized to my current husband many times because I'm like, I am sorry. I am going to say no more than I ever have in my life. And I am going to assert myself more than I ever would have ever before. And you're getting this version of me, this new version. But I don't want to be sorry because I shouldn't have to be. I think that if I had been raised to feel comfortable and know that I had that option, it would have been different. But some of us aren't, and some of us find ourselves, life puts us in those situations, and all you can do is change it going forward. If you can get out of that abusive situation, if you can move forward with your life, you just have to make sure you don't end up repeating that cycle, because I found myself in this, I call it the hamster wheel. And kept trying to get off of it. I wanted to get off of it. But every step forward, I was right exactly in the same place because I was doing the same things. You know, there's this saying, if you always do what you've always done, you always get what you always got. And that's kind of what I was doing. And it was finally when I did something and was safely different and was safely able to extract myself. Attorney number 7, ironically, is the one who got me out within 3 weeks. Once the courts reopened with after COVID, I called this attorney. I said, here's the deal. Wash my hands clean. I don't need the money. I can make more. I don't need any stuff. I'm not going to fight over stuff. I can get more stuff. I can't replace me and I can't replace my son. I'm done with all of it. Just get me out of this. And 3 weeks later, thankfully, I was divorced.
Thank you so much for sharing your story with us. There's so much in there that I think our audience is going to resonate with. All of the tactics that you talked about that your ex-husband was using, the gaslighting and the intimidation and the manipulation and all of that stuff. That is stuff that what 99% of abuse victims literally go through every single time, because there's a reason that the abusers are using those tactics, right? They use them
Right.
because they work. They use them because it's time and time again. This is how I can get what I want. This is how I can get people on my side. This is how I can discredit her
Mhm.
and make sure that I am, because they're working on this from long
Day
before,
one.
right?
Yeah.
Like they're building up this story, this version of themselves and of you and the situation, so that when it comes down to you saying, hey, this person is abusing me, no one's jumping in on that
No one.
bandwagon, because it's so out of the whole story that they've been fed this whole time. And in the same step, like keeping you quiet, keeping you with your head down and not talking about these things, it creates that distance between you and the people in your lives that, well, of course, who would I believe? The person I talk to all the time who just is
Mhm.
always so sweet and nice and just doing all these things, or the person who just doesn't even talk to me, who's always got her head down, who's always, moody and blah, blah, blah.
Yep.
It's a tactic that works and it's used time and time again by abusers. And
Yes.
it's unfortunately, it's the most unfair thing ever, because everything that you're like, no, you do that thing. They're like,
Yeah.
no, you do that thing.
Well, and that's the part of it that was so hard for me. And I think that I'm sure you feel the same way. People that I talk to that share their stories with me and they're looking for an answer, they're looking for some escape, they're looking for justification for that validation. They just don't understand why people don't believe them. But that's exactly it. There is a story out there about you, and you have no idea because this person is saying, I love you to your face, and that you're the one, and you're this and that. Then they're abusing you. Then they love you again and they apologize. It'll never happen again. And I'll stop drinking and all the promises. So they keep you and you're hopeful and you're invested. And so you stay and you think you're doing the right thing by the kids and by them. And maybe you have a savior complex and think you can change them or save them if you love them enough, or you can be better. But the story doesn't change, it just gets worse. And that is something that's really hard for people to accept, is that you can't control what other people think about you. And you're certainly not going to control this person who's abusing you either. But they have decided who you are. They have spread that narrative, and you are playing into it because people are not seeing what's happening. They do not know. Like for me, I always appeared with, we were talking about Wednesday Addams earlier. I was Wednesday Addams because I was withdrawn. And even now, I'm going to admit there are certain social situations that I feel very uncomfortable with certain people, or where I know I'm not really wanted there because of my truth that I've spoken, where I just kind of stay in the corner and kind of keep to myself and don't speak unless spoken to. Because when I was with my ex-husband, again, weddings, birthday parties, whatever, it was always whispering in my ear, why are you smiling at that guy? Are you blanking him?
Mhm.
And then I'd have to deal with it in the car ride the whole way home. And then maybe 3 weeks of silent treatment just because I laughed at somebody's joke. That was a male and he assumed I was doing something else. I would try to go to church on Sunday morning every Sunday. I would be accused of screwing the 80-some-year-old priest. Why do you need to go to? There would be a fight every Sunday morning. Every Sunday morning. And I was always late to church. And the priest even would joke to me, about being late. And what am I going to tell him?
Yeah.
I mean, it's embarrassing. If I went to the Dollar General 5 minutes away because the cats were out of food, I was gone too long. There was a really long line and there was only one cashier because I don't know why Dollar Generals never have more than one person working. But,
It's a constant.
it really is. But it didn't matter. I was gone too long. I must not have been really buying cat food. I was really at some random boyfriend's house screwing them. But what was he doing? He had cheated on me before we got married. He cheated on me during. I didn't even ask anymore. He would walk out the door to go out with his friends on a Friday night and walk in Sunday afternoon. And I got to the point where I didn't even care because at least it wasn't me. But how sad is that we are the ones that end up being quiet because it's better to be quiet. Like people would come up to me all the time and it pained me because there were certain people that kind of sensed what was going on and they would say, "Oh, you need to be strong." And I just remember looking at one of them like, if one more person tells me that, I said, "Do you know how much strength it takes to keep my mouth shut and to stay in this situation and not do," and I'm not being funny, but to not do something criminal so that I can still be present for my son who I want to actually raise and don't want to be imprisoned or dead and left with this person who's doing this to me because I don't want my son to be like that. That's strength. I wasn't being submissive. People think they would say that I was weak or why are you so submissive? Is that a cultural thing? Is it, because I'm half Hispanic? No, it's not. It's because it was easier for me to keep my mouth shut and not poke the sleeping bear, basically, to just keep the peace. Because it wasn't just for me. It was once my son came into the picture, that was the game changer. I didn't want him to have to endure the childhood I did. I didn't want him to have to endure half of what I did. And he's still to this day at 21 years old, he doesn't even know maybe a quarter of what actually was going on right under his nose in that house. He has no clue. And the things he has heard, and because unfortunately, once you get police involved, it's hard to not hear about things, especially in our small town, which is just adds a whole other layer of, messery to it. But, he has told people, even things he knows to be true, he has told people that never happened. My mom just made that up, which adds to my ex's story of I'm a liar, but it's because my son told me he doesn't want people to think we're those kind of people. He doesn't want people to shame him or judge him like they have done to me. And how sad is that? How sad and disgusting that we're not supporting victims and we're not supporting the children that are in the mess of this that somehow escape, maybe physically unscathed, but not mentally. And now they're lying, just like their parent that abused everybody. It saddens me. But there's a lot here. There's so much to talk about. I just want to say one more thing that people don't realize the prevalence of this. Last statistic I read, and I want to say it was off the CDC, but they said 38% of all women murdered are murdered by their partner. And that scares me. Odds are not good for us.
Yeah. One of the things that I wanted to kind of highlight a little bit more, because it was one of the things you wanted to make sure we talked about is the acceptance of abuse. and not necessarily just as a society in general, because obviously as a society in general, we do tend to accept abuse or just allow for it to take place, which is why we often will try to silence victims, because by doing so, we allow for the abuse to continue. And the example I used to kind of explain to people a little bit how we learn to accept that abuse in relationships is, maybe my friends are weird, and I think I've used this example before on the podcast too, but how many of you listening have ever talked to your friends about if one of you needed to get rid of a body, you know who you could rely on, no questions asked? And like, yeah, I know what friends I could call up, be like, hey dude, we got to do something. And I know they'll come and help me no matter what, no questions asked. Now, we're not going to justify every murderer, right? Because hopefully we all agree that murder is bad. But if it's our friend, well, I know my friend is a good person, or I know my friend has these qualities that I think make him at least a good enough person to where if he murdered somebody, there had to have been a reason why he did it. So I make the justifications for him. And often we see that with victims of abuse too, where they make the justifications. Oh, he's like this when he's drinking. Or
Yeah.
he's nice most of the time. It's just sometimes he's abusive. So we make those justifications that then enables and allows for some of the abuse to take place. Again, like you said, Dana, this isn't making the abuse the victim's fault.
No,
But
I understand.
they're being taught to accept that abuse from this person that loves them.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, there's a
talking
lot
about
there.
when you're talking about people who have experienced abuse in their childhood as well,
Mm-hmm.
that's all they know. That's what they come to accept. This is what love looks like. And if you're being raised by parents who also were raised by parents who had that abuse in their life, then that's all they knew as well. So there's no hope in that little circle of getting out of that trauma, that cycle. And when you throw into that like small town, right? Like you're not exposed to the rest of the world. And when you are looking at a time when internet wasn't prevalent and they didn't show certain things on TV and they didn't, your only world was that little tiny world around you. And whatever that was your norm. I had a coworker say to me the other day that like I didn't even know that not having kids was an option.
Hmm.
Like it was just an expectation that you were a woman, you were going to grow up and have some kids and have a family, and there was no other choice in that. She said, had I known that it was an option to not have kids, I may not have had kids, but it was an expectation. So I think
Yeah.
that the world that we have now, like today, in this moment, while it's far from perfect, I think we're giving people a better chance to look at the real life, the realization of this kind of abuse occurs. It's not the way people have to live their lives. And you have choices that your grandma did not have, that your
Exactly.
mom did not have. And it's hard to break out of that. It's hard to be different. Like you turn into like that black sheep of the family, right? Because
Mhm.
you are the one who's talking about these things and you're the one who's wanting something that's not what's expected. And we lose friends, we lose family, and we lose people's respect because they want to keep that status quo. But the more people we can bring around to knowing that the status quo doesn't have to be, there's more out there for us. And if you
There is, yeah.
choose to like stay in that small town and you choose to have kids and a family and do all this, that's wonderful for you if it's your choice. But if you feel
Yeah.
like there is no choice, then what are we doing, right?
And that's the thing. I mean, for me, I was born and raised in Chicago. I mean, I couldn't have been more of a city girl. Went to DePaul University. I mean, And this man brought me out to cornfields in Illinois. And I'm like, where are we? Like, people were calling me Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz. Like, there's tornadoes and, Children of the Corn vibes at 5 a.m. with the,
That's
fog in the
yep.
road. Like, I'm just waiting for that Jeepers Creepers guy to like be standing out there. Like, yeah, it's kind of creepy out here when it gets like that. But the thing is that people do take for granted, though, when you talk about the status quo, people take for granted that, my siblings that live in the city still, they have a different mother. They just assume everybody has a smartphone, and they just assume that everybody listens to podcasts and can read, books and do these things. I was brought out here, and my ex did not see fit for me to have I didn't need a smartphone. In 2020, when we were still together, I still had one of those sliders, and I could text and call. I didn't even have emojis. I didn't have an internet. I didn't even know what an emoji was. I didn't know what a podcast was. I'd never listened to a podcast because he didn't want me on the internet. He didn't want me reading books. Why? Oh, because he didn't want me to have outside influence. He didn't want me to have information. And I'm a college graduate. I'm, I loved reading. I majored in journalism. I'm a writer. I'm a speaker. Like, that's what I did.
Yeah.
Like, how could I not communicate with the world? And I grew up going to the art museum and the symphony, and I'm in this small town. Basically, he told me our house was going to be our prison. So I did not, 4 years ago, have access. And let me tell you, there are people out there that probably live in even more remote and rural areas that will never hear this podcast and still don't know what a podcast is and still don't have a smartphone. I got my first smartphone towards the end of 2020 when I was divorced. And it was like opening a whole new world. I remember the very first podcast I listened to, ironically, about narcissism. And I remember hearing the woman telling her story and thinking, oh my God, somebody else has lived this. I thought it was just me. I had no idea. And so this is why we need to get this information out there, because I think there is a status quo, but a lot of people just really have no clue. I mean, I didn't even know what a narcissist was until I had a smartphone and could start Googling the things that I had been experiencing and the things that I had endured. And I don't even care what you call it. Wrong is wrong. We all have a moral compass. Some of us live by it, some don't. But I definitely encourage people, again, if you know somebody that you think is going through the situation, please, please, please share this podcast, because it will benefit them to know that somebody has been through what they've been through and gets it.
Yeah. It's one of the things that makes me actually really happy that we have survivors and like yourself, Dana, who are willing to come onto our podcast and spend the hour and a half, however long they end up with us, being willing to share their stories, because we know that the more that survivors are willing and able to share their stories, have that platform given to them where they are able to spread that message out, it does help them feel more connected.
Yes.
Because, like you were isolated from everyone. So maybe all those connections that you had prior to the relationship are gone.
Yes.
And when someone is looking to try to navigate the world now without the people that they had as a support system prior to the relationship, the abusive person is now out of, but not fully out of their lives. They really don't have a support system now.
Right.
So hopefully things like this episode and every other podcast that you end up going on are the things that help people realize I'm not alone. There is a community of people that I can talk to. There is a community of people who are going to believe me and listen to me and make me feel included and involved. And that's my hope. So I'm really thankful for that you wanted to join us for our podcast, because that's really what we want to do.
And I appreciate that. And I'm thankful that you had me on, and I couldn't agree more. And I want to express to everybody, just to tag on to that real quickly, even in our small town that I still live in, I cannot seem to get out of this place, but It's amazing. We don't have the resources available here that are available in larger, metropolitan areas, but I know that we have a women's shelter. We have multiple. We have food pantries. We have churches and people that will never let you live on the street, that will make sure you have a place to sleep and that your children will be safe and you'll be clothed and fed and you will be helped until you are okay. So if we have those here where I live, I assure you, wherever you are in this world, there is someone or somewhere you can reach out to provide you with that assistance, because I think that's, for me at least, a big part of the messages that I get is I can't because I don't know how I would take care of my kids. I don't have a job because I'm a stay-at-home mom. I can't support my children. I promise you there are people out there like us that can direct you to the resources to get you to a place where you will be safe. It may not be luxury, but if you are safe, fed, and mentally okay, I promise life will be much better until you can get back up on your feet on your own.
Well, thank you so much, Dana, for joining us today, sharing your story with our audience, and being somebody that can really help those who may be listening who do feel alone, that they're not alone. There are people who've experienced similar things to them, and that there is, even if it looks like a very, very dim light right now, there is a possible light at the end of that tunnel. So thank you for coming on and thank you for sharing your story with us today.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And then before we wrap up and let you go, do you have any socials that you want to push out to our audience?
Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. Do you want me to send them to you to put in the show notes?
Yes.
Perfect.
Awesome. So, yep, links to all of those will be in the show notes for everyone. And then also, where can people find your books?
Anywhere you buy books online. And I will say, if you have Kindle, I know it's free on Amazon to get the ebook. I made sure there was an ebook because if you need to hide it in your phone and read it that way, that's a much easier way to read a book with the name Abuse in the title. But Gasping for Air, it's Stranglehold of Narcissistic Abuse. You can get it print or ebook, and all of my books will be available in ebook form going forward.
Awesome. And I'll make sure that I have links to those in the show notes as well for people to check those out if that's something that they want to do. But again, thank you, Dana, for joining us today. And thank you all for listening. Please follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Threads at Touchy Subs Pod to keep up to date when we have new episodes and new content coming out. Please email us any questions, comments, or concerns to touchysubjectspodcast@gmail.com. And please rate and follow us on your favorite podcast listening app. It really does help the show out.
And in the meantime, don't be afraid to challenge, ask, and discuss when it comes to touchy subjects.